Welcome back to the Anglotopia Podcast. This week we have a special guest. We have somebody who owns a castle, a real castle in England. We have with us Peter Frost-Pennington, who is the owner of Muncaster Castle in Cumbria, which is in the Lake District. Muncaster is a medieval castle on the edge of Cumbria, just a mile or so from the sea at Ravenglass. It's a very remote part of England, but also a perfect place for a castle because even the Romans had an outpost nearby. I visited Muncaster back in 2018 on a visit to the Lake District and fell in love with the place. Peter happens to be a subscriber to the Anglotopia newsletter, and we connected and he got in touch with us. And so I'm delighted to have him speak to us about his castle, its history, and what there is to see and do around it. So welcome, Peter.
Well, thanks very much, Jonathan. Just start off with some minor corrections. I do live here, but I'm not technically the owner.
Okay.
But I'm married to the owner. So I suppose what's hers is mine. But we're a very matriarchal society, and my wife does all the work and I just talk about it. So she's doing something. But it's fun. And in fact, this castle was built to keep me out because I originally hail from north of the border, Scotland or Edinburgh, and but we've captured the castle through love rather than by conquest after all these years. But yeah, it is our family home, and it's just a fabulously romantic and very strategic place.
Well, fantastic. So you've started there, but let's set the scene for us. Please tell our listeners about your castle, why it's famous, where it is, and why they should come visit.
Well, we're situated on the far northwest of England, so near the debatable lands, the borders between England and Scotland, in an area called Cumbria, although we've just gone back to the more historical name in our local government reorganisation of Cumberland. So I know there's plenty of Cumberlands all over the world, but we are the original Cumberland, home of the Cumberland sausage and all that kind of stuff. We're on the edge of the English Lake District. We're in the English Lake District National Park. And in fact, we're one of the few places in the world to be in two World Heritage Sites. Because not only is the English Lake District designated World Heritage Site, but we're seen as the start of the Roman frontiers, the frontiers of the Roman Empire. We're not technically Hadrian's Wall. Hadrian's Wall is quite a bit to the north of us, but we're on the coast. We're, if you like, the camp bastion of Hadrian's Wall. So Agricola, the Roman general, sailed into Ravenglass, which is the little village next door to Muncaster. The parish is Muncaster, and the little village in the parish is Ravenglass. And it's a fabulous little harbour because there are three rivers drain naturally into a basin that's protected by two sort of land spits. So it gives a very sheltered harbour. And Agricola sailed in 79 AD and stamped his mark here, set up a port and a fort. And this was where the Romans used to supply the whole of the north of England. So we are recognised as the start of the Hadrianic or the Roman frontier. And as I understand it, and other authorities might correct me, but as I understand it, there's a Roman mile fortlet every Roman mile from Muncaster right through to South Shields or Wallsend on the far side of England. And of course, where they ran out of coast, Hadrian had to build a wall. So that's become Hadrian's Wall. We have some of the highest freestanding Roman walls outside of the south of England, so outside of Kent, because down between the castle and the village is the Roman bathhouse, and the walls there stand about 15 foot high, and I'm pretty sure the Pennington family originally lived there because they didn't know it was a Roman bathhouse, but they saw this lovely Roman villa by the sea. It had underfloor heating, it had fresh running water, it was next to the coast and you could jump in your little canoe or boat, and that was the main way they got around in those days, by sailing up and down the rivers or up and down the coast. And it was a fabulous view. But in the sort of 1290s or so, when the Anglo-Scots Wars started, when Edward I of England started trying to stamp his authority over Scotland and Wales and started raiding into Scotland, of course, what you reap, you sow. And so the Scots started coming back raiding as well. And the family, I think, then realised that living in a nice Roman villa by the sea was not the easiest place to defend. So they came up here to the hill above the town or the village, which commands one of the river crossings and a very strategic spot, and built a more fortified castle on the site of an old Roman watchtower. And we've been here ever since. But because the Roman bathhouse. It used to be the ancient family home. I'm pretty sure that's why the walls are still there, because the family stopped the locals stealing the stone to build their own houses. So it's still very much in our hearts, and shows the ancientness of this site. Of course, before the Romans were here, prehistoric man has lived here for millennia, and we have Stone Age axes here. We have arrow flints and all sorts of things. And if you ever come, as I hope you all will, as Jonathan says, it's an amazing place because we're a bit hard to get to. We're on the edge of empire, if you like, on the edge of the UK. But the views are stunning, and it's the one point. The Lake District is famous for its mountains and lakes, and it has a broad coastal plain to the north and south of us. But this is the one point where Scafell Pike, which is England's highest mountain, we can, in fact, I'm looking at it now out of the window, and we're more or less at sea level. And although it's nothing compared to the Rockies or what you have over there in the States, it's huge as far as we're concerned. It's only a few miles from the coast. So it's a very strategic point, and it's where the mountains are literally tumbling into the sea. So whoever holds this bit of land can just control what's happening in the neighbourhood. And if you're heading south to Manchester or Lancaster or anywhere, and we don't want you to cross our river, you don't cross our river without paying us a fee or something. And in times of war or conflict, all the locals would gather here in the fortified tower and would slam the door shut and hurl insults at the Scots and hope they went on to richer pickings elsewhere. So I'm sorry, that's a very long introduction, but it's just a beautiful, beautiful part of the world. John Ruskin, the famous Victorian who came here in the 19th century, presumably for afternoon tea with Lord Muncaster, he described the view that I'm looking at now out of this window as gateway to paradise, and it's little changed since his time. So you're almost in heaven, but not quite. And I think the view has changed very little since Roman times. I'll shut up there and let you get a word in edgeways, Jonathan.
I can confirm that it is a very remote spot. When I visited, I drove up through the Hard Knot Pass and past the Roman fort, past the Roman fort, and drove down into the Esk Valley, and then I rode the train, the little ratty train, the Ravenglass Railway, and then I ended the day at your castle, and it was such a sublime place to visit after a day of traveling. It was a quiet day. It's setting in the landscape is just so stunning, and I was just like, it was a great place to spend an afternoon, and I definitely want to come back. So I'm
Well, anytime. Next time you come, you see, that's what many people come. They come for an hour or two in the afternoon, and that's absolutely fine. And we love greeting people from all over the world. But the best time of day is early in the morning or late in the afternoon or evening. Like now where I'm speaking, it's UK time. We're just going into the evening, and it's absolutely brilliant because you get the place to yourself again. And as well as, greeting visitors, we have accommodation, we run hotels. And I just love the fact when people come to stay here, they get it all to themselves. Well, we're hanging around as well. And the peace and solitude. So next time you come, don't come for the afternoon, come for the whole day and night, and just enjoy. And that's what we're also trying to use the castle for. We're very much reaching out to any overseas market, but particularly the USA, because after its initial role of being a place of defense for the local community and protection, obviously as the ages go on, the socially times move on, and the central government gets stronger. There was no need for a castle on the hill, because you didn't have to fight off the neighbours or the Scots coming past. And as England joined with Scotland and the parliaments joined together, the UK came together as a bigger country, tiny compared to America. And so we no longer needed a fortress. But one of the ancestors who became the first Lord Muncaster came here and looked to this sort of falling apart medieval fortress and said, "Hey guys, I want to impress and entertain my friends in style." And so he sort of changed the script to being a building to impress and entertain, which was initially only for his friends and family and to show off his how important and what a big dude he was. And so he put this was the medieval kitchens. This is the 1780s we're talking of. Power was no longer the force of arms and the number of people you had your mini army to fight for you. Power was knowledge. So, anyone had to have books. This was the Google or the internet of the 18th century. And it must have been amazing to find out what was happening, the Age of Enlightenment in the new lands of America or in Europe, and the new ideas coming in. And behind me, there are about 4,000 books, and this is how people got on in those days. But he turned it into a place to impress and entertain in style. And boy, do we love doing that. People come and ask us, do you really live here? And we say, yes, we do. I think they have the idea we're swanning around in all these rooms and snapping our fingers, and the butler will come running. I wish. We might well be the butler if you come to visit. And in fact, the only room you can't see at Muncaster is the kitchen, because the First Lord Muncaster moved the medieval kitchen from this room to the far end of the castle, and we live in it. So basically, we live in one room, but it's warm, and we have dogs and cats and terrible mess. So you'll come to England, as Jonathan knows, and go to many fabulous stately homes and see the beautiful ancient kitchen and all the copper work and all the stoves laid out. I'm afraid, unless you ask very nicely, you can't see our kitchen, but it's because we're still using it. So it's a living, breathing place. And the family's quite eccentric at times. But if we want to do something, hey, we'll do it. So if we want to have a fancy dress party in here, we'll have a fancy dress party in here. So we like saying yes and not no. Although sometimes, we are stewards of these wonderful historic objects and furniture. And we don't, Jonathan introduced me as the owner. We don't see ourselves as owning this place. We just see us as the stewards of the place. And we're on the, well, in English, I would use the term cricket, but maybe, I don't know what the equivalent would be in baseball, but you're on the stump. You're batting at the moment. And I'm delighted to say we're in the process of handing over to my son, who's come back from America. He spent 3 years in California. And it's his job now to look after the place. And I can just swan around and enjoy myself and hopefully have friends and family. So it's a wonderful place. And even if you can only come for a few hours, do come. But if you'd like to come and stay or do a bit more or dine in our fabulous dining room and meet us, the family, and we take you around or take you out to this wonderful part of the world, 2 World Heritage Sites, then we'd love to see you.
So that brings me to my next question is, okay, so you're not the owner. You married into this family. So how did you find yourself? What's the story there? How did you find yourself becoming the steward of a castle?
Well, this is not complicated at all. I'm a city kid. I come from Edinburgh. I always wanted to be in the countryside. I actually wanted to be a farmer. I just wanted to escape the city and be farming cows or cattle and sheep. And I grew up with the James Herriot stories, and I'm sure our American cousins are well aware of that. He was a famous vet in the 1940s and 50s, and he was quite inspirational to me. And James Herriot became a vet and married a farmer's daughter. And I thought, aha, perhaps I could become a farmer by becoming a vet. So, and I loved animals, so I luckily managed to get into vet college, became a vet, did my training, and I came here as a student. I worked with the local veterinarians in this area and absolutely fell in love with it. It's like a miniature Scotland down here. It's got the mountains, the lakes, the lochs in Scotland, and the people are lovely as well. And I fell in love with the place. And luckily, when I qualified, they offered me a job here. So I just arrived and I was working, and I got invited to a party. Like most parties, the best place in the party is in the kitchen. And I came to the kitchen. Here was this young lady, and her first words to me were, "Oh, you're the new vet in town. Can you come and castrate my bears, please?" And I thought it was an interesting opening line. And I thought, you're a dangerous woman. And I've never changed my opinion ever since. And what was bizarre was she was the daughter of the house. We had a mini zoo here, and they did have bears here. Not American bears. We had Asiatic black Himalayan bears. They were moon bears. They had a half moon crescent on them. And that's a funny story because one of the ancestors got eaten by a bear out in India. He was working in India many, many years ago in the 19th century. And this poor young chap died of his wounds. And I'm sure, in the UK, people have no idea how dangerous bears are. But I know you all know how dangerous bears really are.
Yeah.
And he got beaten up by a bear and died. And many years later, my wife's grandmother was in Harrods Pet Shop in London in the 1960s, where you could buy almost anything. Luckily, things have changed since then. And she saw this little bear cub in a tiny little cage in Harrods Pet Shop. And I don't know if she took pity on it because it was in a small cage, or she wanted to get her own back because a bear had eaten her. uncle or great uncle, but she bought it. I don't know, I believe this part of the story, but she apparently hailed a taxi on Kensington High Street in London and told the taxi driver, take this bear to Muncaster, my good man, which is, well, a short drive in American terms, but 300 or 400 miles in British terms, and that must have been some taxi fare. So they got a bear, and they got another bear called Rupert, and they fell in love and did what came naturally. And so by the time I arrived in the scene, we had bears not quite everywhere, but Iona wanted to stop the breeding activities. I managed to persuade her not to castrate Rupert the bear, and we actually eventually ended up sending them to various zoos, and we concentrate on birds of prey. But that's the first time I met my wife, and one thing led to another, and for better or for worse, I did marry my farmer's daughter because her parents were farmers. The complication was the family also owned a castle, so I've seemed to spend most of my working life now farming tourists. Although I'm very pleased to say that at the ripe old age of 62, my ambition has finally been satisfied, because some of the sort of environmental schemes down around here, we've just bought some cattle, and we're now personally responsible for farming a herd of beef cattle that are running around the hills here. So I'm in fact, we're slightly worried today. There's one of them due to calve. So at last, at the age of 62, so live your dream, guys. You can get there eventually. And
Living the dream.
Along the way. So that's a long, complicated story, but that's how I got hooked into it. And for me, this is incredible. I'm not of this world, but suddenly I'm married to, well, now the Queen. It was my mother-in-law, because my wife is one of 4 girls, and her mother was one of 4 girls. So twice it's gone down the female line. Although very pleased we've had 2 boys and a girl. Although, just so happens our son is taking over, but our daughter's probably, don't tell my son, but my daughter might be the better person to run this place. Anyway, we'll see how he does. And if he makes a rubbish job of it, we'll call her back in. So, but hey, live your dreams, guys.
So speaking of the place as a tourist attraction, so I was reading up on the history of the place that your predecessors actually kind of restored the castle and turned it into a tourist attraction. Can you tell us more about that, about the history of that?
Yeah, well, it's quite a complicated family history. I mean, it's stayed in the same family for over 800 years. The Pennington family have lived here. The official date we tend to give is the 1st of December 1208, when bad King John, and I don't know if you know about, but he wasn't one of our better kings in this country. But he was running around the country sort of trying to raise cash, and he came up north and was handing out favors. And the first definite record we have of a Pennington owning here was this grant of land to an Alan de Muncaster, or Alan de Pennington rather, in 1st December 1208. Although there's references to the family being here long before that, the century or 2 before. And of course, this is very much a Viking area. After the Romans left, the Norsemen, the Scandinavians, the Vikings came raiding around the coast and setting up. And that's why many of our place names are of Viking origin. We don't have valleys and mountains here. We have dales and fells. A dale being a valley and a mountain being a fell, and we have, we're on the River Esk, and a lot of the Viking influences here, and so the Penningtons arrived 1208. We've lived here ever since. They made their money out of agriculture, mining, etc., defending the northern marches from the rampaging Scots for many centuries, and then sort of mining and forestry and agriculture. But by the last true Lord Muncaster died in 1917, so we're just plain Mr. and Mrs. I'm not a lord or lady, thank goodness. I'm just Mr. Frost-Pennington, and quite rightly so. And my wife's great-grandfather inherited the place from his cousin. So it has stayed in the same family, but not quite by direct line. And this chap called Sir John Ramsden had estates and properties all over the place. He was farming in Malaya and doing rubber farming there. He had estates in Kenya and estates in Scotland. So he wasn't here a huge amount of the time, but we have fabulous gardens, and we owe a lot to Sir John. Came here in the 1920s and 30s. He had 30 gardeners working for him. He was subscribing to all the great plant hunting expeditions to China and the Far East. So we've got a fabulous horticultural collection of rare rhododendrons and plants. In the UK, these houses were lived in. They survived the First World War. After the Second World War, there was a change in politics, and many of these places were pulled down and demolished. And suddenly, society woke up to the fact that these places had kind of lost their way, and they started opening up some of them as tourist attractions. And I'm sure you'll know the Blenheims and the Chatsworths, what I call the Premier League, where maybe, I don't know, where second division or third division. So, but more fun than the lower leagues. And Muncaster opened its gates as a tourist attraction way back in 1968. So we've been open to the public for well over 50 years. There were quite a lot of people, as I understand it, from I think 1905. Anyone could turn up and go around the gardens if they paid a shilling or two to the gatekeeper. So we've been in tourism for a long time, but really in the UK anyway, tourism didn't take off until mass transport and families managed to get the income that, and the arrival of trains helped in the 19th century. But, really in our country, families didn't own cars until really after the Second World War. So by the 60s, there was a lot of local tourism, and we've been a tourist attraction ever since. And we've always had as well as the castle, the historic side, we've had wonderful gardens, and this mini zoo, which is why we had the bears. But in the mid-80s, we decided to specialize and do conservation work. And we've always been a bird garden, but we developed what's now the Hawk and Owl Centre. We specialized on owls and had a collection of owls here long before Harry Potter. Harry Potter came along, and absolutely fabulous, because until then, at least in the UK, and many cultures around the world, owls are seen as birds of ill omen and creatures of the night. With Harry Potter, everyone just loves owls, and they became very trendy. We now have expanded into hawks and owls. We have eagles, falcons, and our most prized possession is vultures. And we're working with vultures around the world, particularly in Africa. I know you've done pretty well in America saving the Californian condor, and I was lucky enough to see them in California. And we're doing lots of work like that and just educating people. So I can't remember what the original question was, John. What am I talking about? Have I answered?
Yeah, you've answered the question perfectly. I want to know how it became a tourist attraction,
and
you did it.
Well, if you want me to do it shorter, I probably could. We became a tourist attraction to make money.
No, makes sense.
And keep the roof on.
So we'll talk about the Hawk and Owl Center in a sec, but I wanted to ask you. I was reading about this and found it really interesting. What is the Luck of Muncaster?
Well, that's one of our classic stories. I would like to think the family have survived here because we're maybe good at dealing with change and readapting, and that's a great thing about being lived in by. We don't have big committees. We're not a charitable trust or anything. We don't have to get it. We do have various business organisations that help us and external trustees or board members, but the Luck of Muncaster is a very important story. I think it's down to during the Wars of the Roses. I don't know if your audience is aware, but we've had so many civil wars in this country. We've always been fighting. And one of the major civil wars was what's now called the Wars of the Roses, which was between two big dynastic families, the House of Lancaster and the House of York. And we are in the Lancastrian area, so we're staunch Lancastrians. And Henry V, you might have heard of, was the great Lancastrian king who won the Battle of Agincourt in 1415 against the French and really captured most of France for the English crown. And his son, who became Henry VI, was the only man in history to be crowned both King of England and King of France because of the fact his father won the Battle of Agincourt. Unfortunately, Henry VI was not nearly so good a general as his father, and the French started to, this is a vast oversimplification of the Wars of the Roses, but as I understand it, the French started to rise up and fight the English and take back their country from them. and Henry kept losing battles. He married a very warlike wife, a lady called Margaret of Anjou, and Margaret was a much better general than Henry was, but that's another story. A bit like my wife, she's quite a tiger when fighting. But anyway, and so I think some of the nobles got a bit disgruntled that they were starting to lose their nice French wines and cheeses and losing their French territories. So they thought Henry VI was a bit of a numpty. And he did have what we call now sort of mental health problems and things. So some of the nobles rose up against him, threw him off the throne, and put Edward of York, boo hiss, upstart, on the throne of England. And the war rumbled on for quite some time. Henry kept losing battles, and he went into Scotland, raised another army, came back, and in 1464 he lost the Battle of Hexham. Now Hexham is not very far away from here. He fled in one direction. His queen and his son, the Prince of Wales, fled in another direction. And so the story goes, Henry VI turned up, dishevelled, with only one servant with him, a chap called Sir Richard Tunstall. He had sought shelter at the neighbouring castle, and they probably quite sensibly have said, "You're not king anymore, and if we take you in, it'll be curtains for us." So they threw him out, would have nothing more to do with him. And he sheltered in the woods and put a curse on that place. And the next day he was found wandering aimlessly on the hills around Muncaster by some shepherds. Now the shepherds brought him into the castle and presented him to Sir John Pennington, who lived here. Sir John Pennington was quite an old man, the incumbent. He'd fought with Henry's father at the Battle of Agincourt, so I think he was in his 70s or so. So he was a staunch Lancastrian, and this was his king. So he took him in, gave him breakfast. We think he sheltered him or hid him here from his foes for 2 or 3 weeks, as far as we're aware. And the king was so pleased with his reception that when he left saying goodbye and left a blessing, which was a little enamel glass, Venetian glass bowl, saying, "As long as this bowl remains unriven, Penningtons from Muncaster never shall be driven." In other words, as long as you don't break the bowl, you'll keep the castle.
Fascinating.
We're very superstitious here, so we do still have this bowl. There's some debate whether it's old enough, but that's another story. But it's certainly ancient. It comes from Murano glass in Venice. It is certainly Henry's prized possession, and it's hidden in the castle. Only the family know where it is. We very carefully look at it once or twice a year and breathe a sigh of relief so it's still intact. My son is very clumsy, so I'm dreading the day when I have to hand over the bowl to him in case he drops it. And it's a lovely legend. Henry, although he was a useless general, was known as Holy King Harry. In fact, there was quite a movement to have him canonized as a saint. In fact, when he left Muncaster, he was eventually captured, carted off the Tower of London, where he was murdered in 1471 after the Battle of Tewkesbury. So I'm sure many of our American friends, if you come to the UK, you'll go to the Tower of London and you can see the spot where Henry VI was murdered, probably by Edward of York, boo hiss. But to us, he's and then Henry Tudor came along and it all got sorted out after Richard III. So it's well over 500 years old. It's our most prized possession. I'm afraid you can't look at it. But we do occasionally bring it out for TV cameras and film it. And so you'll find it on the internet somewhere. And when we break the bowl, the government catches up with us and we're out of here. So the Luck of Muncaster. And sorry, that was all very long-winded, but the Luck of Muncaster, all the luck of the family's in that. And it was given to us by Henry VI, Holy King Harry.
That's a fascinating story. Thank you for sharing that. Hopefully when I come visit, you can show me the bowl.
Well, it's a lovely, it's a living legend, and that's what makes this place so special. I mean,
Right.
the UK is full of with wonderful stories and places and legends. And we haven't started talking about the ghosts yet. We're full of ghosts, but that's another story. But it's not a ghost story. And whenever I tell that story, the hairs stand up in the back of my neck, and you just feel the presence of Henry VI. We've actually got a lock of his hair in this very room, the Tower of London many years ago were doing an important exhibition on famous prisons of the Tower, and they wanted to borrow the Luck of Muncaster, and of course it's far too important to us that we wouldn't dare put it into their safekeeping, and it must never leave the castle. So we said you can't have that, but we do have a lock of King Henry VI's hair, allegedly. So we sent it down to the Tower of London, and I went to see the exhibition. They had a Rudolph Hess's chair next to the lock of King Henry VI's hair. So I thought that was lovely.
Now, speaking of World War II, I was reading that during World War II, many of Britain's national art treasures were kept for safekeeping at Muncaster. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, we're fascinated, and we've known the story for many years. But obviously, in World War II, there was great panic that the great institutions in London would be bombed in the war, as many of them were. And the Tate Gallery at the time made plans, and I think my wife's great grandfather, Sir John, was so overjoyed when he got the letter from the Tate Gallery saying, "Do you mind if we send some of our pictures to you for safekeeping?" Because he thought the castle would be requisitioned by American GIs with their tanks on the lawn or something, who would play darts and fire rifles around the place, or perhaps be taken over by refugees and kids. And so he was very happy that instead of that, we got the contents of the Tate Gallery. So, and we've had a local gentleman who's done a lot of research on this lately and found a lot more that we didn't know. And I think about 600 to 800 of the paintings from the Tate Gallery, about a third of them or more, came here, and it included things like Van Gogh sunflowers, which are now back in the National Gallery, I think, and a huge amount of amazing portraits and paintings. And they just came up here. It wasn't top secret, but I met a gentleman who started his working life here in the 1920s. As the lowest of the low on the male side, as a hall boy, and he became a joiner. And he was here just when the war started, and he told me stories about they were asked to go and meet the London train with the estate lorry, and they went down, and the doors of this train opened. They expected to be offloading refugees and bring them up to the castle, and all these packing crates were there with their curators, and they loaded all these paintings, brought them up here. And for the 6 years of the war, they were kept safely in Muncaster Castle, away from the German bombs. I think we were bombed once, but the bombs missed. And I think it was quite a culture shock for all these curators who came up with their families from the East End of London and were living here in terrible isolation. But the paintings were safe. And the Tate Gallery did get bombed very badly. And they would have been destroyed in the war. So it was great when we could send them back. And it's I keep thinking I need to ring up the Tate Gallery one day and ask whether we could maybe have Van Gogh sunflowers back again. Just to I think we might have to improve our security.
Just
But
borrow a couple Turners, right?
yeah, oh, there were loads of Turners came here, and constables and all sorts of things, and it's great. So we want to do some more work on that. And but yes, a place of sanctuary and defence, and it's still doing its role. And not to want anything nasty to happen in the world again, but hey, we're up for looking after the country's treasures again if necessary.
You're the perfect place for it. I mean, what better place than a castle, right? Um, I watch a lot of British fly on the wall documentaries about famous tourist attractions and whatnot. I'm fascinated by how they're run and how they deal with visitors. And so I know this is kind of an inside baseball question, as we would say here, but what has surprised you most about running a heritage attraction in the UK?
Well, it's all consuming, really. I mean, first of all, it is great fun. People ask us that question and ask what you do all day, and you sort of go into goldfish mode and go, oh, I'm not sure. But if I told you, you wouldn't believe it. But I mean, we're maybe not quite the same as some places, but in many ways, it's just like being a vet. There's so much things happen here, go wrong. I mean, for example, this last weekend we had a big wedding. We love seeing people come and using it for something romantic, like getting married here. And we love people seeing it as their family home and being the king and queen of the castle. But what people probably don't appreciate is when we've had some American groups come, and I'll be out there in best bib and tucker and doing black ties, and chatting and telling them all the tales and legends. And then the toilets block. And before I know it, as happened this wedding, the sewers got blocked, and there I was finding the drainage rods and putting on the welly boots and overalls and sorting out that kind of thing. So it's the unpredictability of it. And the other thing I find fascinating is no matter what age you are, you're always learning, and people make amazing discoveries here. This is a treasury of art and antiques. And if you just think how many people have passed through this space and the knowledge of and all the time we're having experts coming in and they point out to you something which I know you appreciate, Jonathan. In fact, I've learned so much from your because you research so much about I love reading your articles and learning so much about Victorian philosophy or something, or how the toilet was invented or whatever. And it's brilliant, or how banknotes came about and things like that. And so we're always learning. And what I love is sometimes you open a book and a letter falls out, and we get volunteers coming in here, and they read up, and a lot of it is, a bit like being in the military, can be very boring and tedious, and then suddenly you get something really exciting. So it's always surprises, and I love it when you find something from the past. And I'm trying to make sure that when we do any works, we leave a newspaper of the time or a bit of a time capsule. Because when you bring up a floorboard and find someone's signature and beautiful copper plate writing, and I'm just wanting to know more, you sometimes get a name like Joe Pickthall, 1842, and you think, how many guys did he have in his family? And what did he have for lunch? So it's the constant pursuit of knowledge and getting little fragments of the jigsaw and piecing it together. And you always get surprised. I think people's perceptions of places like this are different to the reality. And I love it when people come and they find, hey, well, I hope we're just kind of normal guys. We're just living in extraordinary circumstances, and you just got to make the best of whatever you're looking after in your lives, and be kind to people and do unto others you do unto them. And we learn so much from people coming from all over the world and telling us stuff, and experts. So it's the learning curve. I'm always learning, and I hope I'll be learning till the day I die. And except I forget lots of stuff now.
Well, that's an interesting point you bring up, and does it feel like a bit of a fishbowl? Because I know, like, a lot of Americans will visit National Trust properties, and those are more museum than home because the families have either left or they don't. If they live there, it's in a small part of it. Like, what is it like as being your family home, but also this big tourist attraction?
Well, we personally love it. I mean, as you can tell, we're probably quite outgoing. We love being sociable. We love talking to people. It's one of the simple. I don't know what happens in the States, but I don't think we're very good in this country. Just trying to get kids to learn. Put down your phones and ask people, and you can find out the most amazing things about people. So we love interacting with people, and we genuinely, and from our point of view, we don't have vast investments. The farming, agriculture, and this, all the assets have kind of been sold off. So in many ways, not all the assets, but the land holding we now have is relatively small. We're looking after all these ancient objects. So we have to go out to raise money by opening the doors and bring people in. But I do a fabulous job. We're giving people pleasure, and the joy of people coming in and appreciating these things. Of course, sometimes people come and don't have a clue what they're looking at or understand the craftsmanship, but most people are really appreciative of it. And we just love interacting with people, and also it's a living place. The National Trust and English Heritage, and I'm sure the organisation in your country do great works of looking after places. Like, I was lucky enough to go to Monticello in Virginia, and that was brilliant to see how it's a shrine to people from the past, but it's kind of dead. It doesn't move on. But wonderful about teaching people about that great person who lived there. But what's great about Muncaster is we've never really had anyone too special or important living here. And we are the goldfish in the bowl. And sometimes that does get you down a bit, but well, on the whole, we love it. And if it just warms the cockles of your heart when people come and say they've had a fabulous time here, and thank you so much, and thank you for sharing it with us. So I think there's nothing better than doing a job that you genuinely love doing. And I love my job. Just sometimes there's a bit much of it when 10 o'clock on a Saturday night, you realize you've got to go and unblock a sewer. And it's not all glamour, and we don't have the vast resources of some of the institutions that would call in the maintenance man to do. We obviously have a wonderful staff who do here, and very skilled people working here. But as one of your presidents said, the buck stops here. And that's very similar to being a veterinarian. If you're a vet, the phone rings and there's some horrendous When I was a vet, you couldn't, now there's specialists all over the place, you couldn't refer a dog with a broken leg, you had to fix it yourself. And it's very similar at Muncaster. If the problem goes wrong, you have to fix it. Now, my son's coming in and going, "This is wrong, Dad. We need to get experts in, and I'm not going to do what you've done." So things will change and evolve. But that's the excitement of the place and the pleasure of discovering something. And I know you enjoy that pleasure of finding out fascinating facts and hilarious history and people haven't changed and society hasn't changed, but it has, and technology and it must have been so exciting. When the steam railways came and suddenly communications, and now we've got the internet and computers and AI or whatever. And I sort of sum it up by saying we have one eye on we honor the past, but we're looking to the future, if that makes sense. In other words, this isn't a dead place. It's not fossilized. Whether my descendants will be living here in 10, 20, 30 years' time, 40, 50, I have no idea. But I just hope it's welcoming people. They're appreciating what's here and they're enjoying it, and we're sharing it with the wider community in the world and looking after it to the best of our abilities, because it's a fabulous cornucopia of history and culture and all sorts of other things besides.
Yeah, I would say that it ticks a lot of my interest boxes: British aristocracy, history, architecture, tourist attractions. It's like a little microcosm of the bits of England that I love. So, I wanted to ask you. You touched on this a little bit earlier. How did you become an important place for hawks and owls? Can you tell us more about that?
Well, I think always, the aristocracy have been trying to do their best for preserving the environment. And interesting, in this country anyway, there's a great movement with the climate emergency and rewilding and things. So we've always had a care for the environment. And Muncaster, an expert came to me many years ago and said, what's so great about Muncaster is it has almost every type of habitat in the UK within 8 miles of Muncaster. We're on the coast, so we have in the coast itself, the beaches, we have the rivers and the intertidal strip. We have a narrow strip of reasonable agricultural land. We have woodland, we have grassland, and then we're going up to Scafell Pike, England's highest mountain. So we have mountains, woodlands, moorland, and the high mountain tops. And so we are very well off for nature and wildlife, which has been decimated in so many other areas. I think the only sort of habitat we don't really have here is limestone pavements, which you get over in Yorkshire way. So we can almost release any animal or insect within 8 miles of Muncaster. So and we have 2 red data species that I know of. One, a tiny little plant called Touch Me Not Balsam, that is the home to a red data species of moth, the netty carpet moth. And I spend a lot of my time at the moment trying to make sure that hangs on. That comes from the prehistoric time where herds of aurochs, which were prehistoric cattle, roamed through woodland, paddling up the ground and then moving on. So there's always been a fascination with trying to, I think each generation, I hope, tries to leave the world in a better place to how they arrived, or at least try and make sure it doesn't disintegrate. And so we've always had a love of birds. I think when it opened in 1968, my wife's grandfather, we had a collection of pheasants and birds. We had flamingos, we had cirrus cranes, we had guinea fowl, and people loved that. And now we've definitely gone into we had a local chap came along who was an expert in owls, and in this country, one particular type of owl was definitely dying out, and we needed to bring the attention of the public to it. So we started looking after British barn owl and flying them and telling that story to people. And so it's an education role, and it's just grown from that to realizing that where habitats are degraded, if you put the habitat back, the wildlife will come back. So it's grown to that, and we're now one of the most we like a challenge, and one of the birds we're working with most with, which I mentioned before, is the vulture. And we don't actually have vultures in the UK. We have other animals that do that role, like crows and corvids, but in Africa, for example, vultures are dying out for various reasons, but due to poaching and a traditional medicine where people, because vultures have such long, far sight and can see, poor vultures. Any other animal is looking for things moving. Vultures have to find dead stuff, which is why they're quite a sociable bird and do the circling and say, hey guys, food down here. And the poachers in Africa, poaching elephants and rhinos, they know the vultures will bring the park wardens into where they've poached and maybe catch the poachers. So they poison the carcasses and it's killing loads of vultures. And if you describe someone as a vulture, it's, people don't tend to like vultures because some people think they're ugly. We think they're very beautiful. And for example, the hooded vulture, Necrocites monarchus, is on the verge of extinction in Africa. And we have 5 or 6 hooded vultures here. We fly them every day. We bring out the fluffy owls and fly them around, and people love them. And we love all our birds that we have here fly free every day, and they fly back because they love us, and it's actually stomach love. But we're looking after them, and we demonstrate how different birds of prey fly in different ways. And we're educating people, and then we try to make them realize what they can do for in wherever you live, whether you live in a flat in the middle of a town or city, you can have a box of pollinating plants on your windowsill, and that helps the bees and the insects. And so we're doing a lot of work, and we're hoping to do more work in supporting the Africans, because if the vultures die out in an area, vultures do a great job for us as humans, because they clear up, they can, their stomach acid is so strong, stronger than battery acid, it can detoxify rabies, botulism, E. coli. You can't deal with modern chemical poisons. And so what happens when vultures die out in areas, something comes in to replace them. And in many sort of areas of the world, what comes in to replace them is wild dogs. And what do wild dogs carry? Rabies. And if there's one disease I definitely don't want to die of, it's rabies. So we're just trying to raise levels of awareness. We're trying to make people, don't judge a book by the cover. Vultures are wonderful animals that need our help, and we need them. So it's not just having animals in a zoo for people to come and gawp at and go, oh, isn't that wonderful? We try to make sure people understand them and love them and help us in the work we're doing as a small piece of working with other people and institutions around the world to protect and preserve our wonderful natural heritage. And it's a great thing to do and see.
Fascinating stuff. Now, I wanted to ask, and this may have a very long answer or a very short answer, is does Muncaster have any American connections?
Yes, well, we're on the west coast of Cumbria, and just to the north of us is the port of Whitehaven, which I'm sure most of you are very well aware that John Paul Jones sailed in the American War of Independence and spiked the cannons in the harbour, and then went to the pub and had a pint or two. So, and John Paul Jones was, I think he was bred just north of here and went over to the States and was he your first admiral or something? So that's just down the road. And I think Washington's grandmother is buried in Whitehaven. And of course, this side of the country did a lot of trade with the Americas. And just again in Whitehaven, we have a tourist attraction called the Rum Story, because of course there was the trade in goods going over the Atlantic, and rum and sugar and goods coming back from the Americas, and tobacco, of course. So we were the main artery, like the Heathrow Airport of the day. Whitehaven would be trading with the Americas, and that's why much of our local Cumbrian cuisine is based on having sugar and spirits like rum from the Caribbean and the Americas. So we have rum butter, for example, which is a delicacy around here. We have things using the Cumberland sausage, is because we had the spices coming in from the Americas. As in whether Muncaster has any direct links to America, well, we love having Americans to stay here. And yes, when we went over to Virginia and we went to Jamestown, if you haven't been to Jamestown, I'd very much recommend you go. I think it was the first successful English colony to survive in the Americas, and I think 3 ships sailed in the early 1600s and dropped 104 poor individuals on the side of the swamp and then sailed off back to England. And when I went there, I was fascinated to see all these people are named in the Jamestown Museum, and number 26 is John Pennington.
Oh,
So there's
fascinating.
a Pennington on the first boat to America. And most of these first immigrants came from the southeast corner of England, where the money and the power was. But I saw in another part of the Jamestown Museum, there's a list of where all the people came from. And I straight away saw number 26 was on the in the middle of Cumbria. And I said, I bet that's John Pennington. And sure enough, number 26, I think it was John Pennington. So I suspect he was the second son, and he knew his older brother or something was going to inherit the castle. And hey, guys, I'm off to the new lands of America to make my fortune. I'm not sure he survived that first summer,
Oh dear.
but obviously there's loads of Penningtons in America. And I'm sure many of you listening to this might be Penningtons yourselves. And we love greeting. Normally every month we get 2 or 3 Penningtons come over, and we think, they're our cousins. And in fact, when we had this hiccup in the family history in 1917, when the last Lord Muncaster died, he had done a lot of work to try and find his nearest male relative. So technically it came down the female line to my wife's family. And I think he tracked down that his nearest male relative was an American who was building the Canadian Pacific Railroad at the time. And he was offered the lordship of Muncaster, not necessarily the castle, but he said, hey, I'm in the new lands of America. What do I want with a crumbling English castle? So he turned it down.
Well, I wouldn't have.
So there's quite a few links with America here, just the way we're facing, if nothing else. But yeah, come and see. And we love greeting Americans as come and stay.
Fascinating stuff. Well, I know we're running short on time, so my last question will be, you mentioned ghosts. Can you tell us about the ghosts of Muncaster?
Jonathan, we'll need a whole new podcast on that. All I'll say is I came here as, vet, as a supposed scientist. I came here thinking, in fact, when I came here and I heard all the stories that my parents-in-law used to tell, I used to think, oh, they've made all this up for the tourists. What fascinates me is so many times the research I've done, I've yet to find a Muncaster story that has been blown apart by the research, and normally it backs it up. As my father used to say, we have 3 ghosts and we're working the 4th because they're good for business. But so it's a very strange place and odd things happen here. If you believe in ghosts, it's hooching with ghosts. If you're maybe more level-headed and think it's nothing to do with ghosts, there's an awful lot of weird coincidences that happen here. But we have a crying child in the bedroom. That's ghost number 1. We have a white lady who haunts the outside. That's Mary Bragg, and we know quite a lot about her. But our big ghost is Thomas Skelton, the Fool of Moncaster. And I hope you're all aware that there's the expression in English, tomfoolery, and stop playing the tomfool. And the original tomfool lived here. But I'm afraid if we're running out of time, that needs a whole new podcast. But we've learnt off our American cousins. We love your Halloween festivals. And, we've now, Halloween has grown to be our biggest event of the year. We do great ghost tours of the castle, and we're now sort of love entertaining people. They love being scared and they love hamming it up. My wife tends to do the scary stuff. And in the castle, we now do fun things for the kids. Last year, we'd run through all our Muncaster ghost stories, and last year we did Frankenstein. So in this very room became Frankenstein's laboratory. I ended up being Frankenstein's monster and getting beaten up. This year in 2024, it's going to be Dracula. So come this October, and I think I've got the starring role of Dracula. And we just love having fun and using this beautiful environment to entertain, enchant, and educate, and give people a right enjoyable day out, or just to go away feeling a bit better about themselves and the world, we hope. And that's my task in life.
Well, thank you so much for coming on the Anglotopia podcast and sharing your wonderful castle with us. And I know that I'm definitely going to have to come back, and I encourage all Anglotopia podcast listeners to make the trip up to Cumbria and visit Muncaster Castle. You will not be disappointed. So thank you so much for your time, Peter.
It's a pleasure, Jonathan, and keep up the good work. I love it. I wish I had more time to sit down and read your articles.
Thank you for reading. I really appreciate it. So thank you.
Bye.